This is Art 490, Baroque architecture in Rome. We're looking at St. Peter's Square in Rome. It's out in front of St. Peter's Basilica. Remember that it's a basilica and not a cathedral. There is another church in Rome called the Cathedral of Rome. Let's talk about this full complex here. What we're looking at is the church here begun in the High Renaissance, and the first part, the back part of here, including the dome and most of this area, was begun, designed in the High Renaissance. And Michelangelo had much to do with this part. This front section here, the continuation of the nave, was done in the Baroque era by Carlo Maderna, and later in the 1600s, Bernini, who we talked about last time, was a sculptor. He's also an architect. He was given the job of being the main architect for St. Peter's after the building itself had been completed. The fabric of the building had been completed, and his job was to do all the finishing work. So he did the piazza, this area here, this colonnade, and much of the work on the inside, and we'll see that in a moment. What we're looking at is a piazza. It means it's like a city square, but in this case, it's oval shaped. Ovals are a Baroque shape compared to if this were done in the High Renaissance, this would have been a circle or a square or a rectangle or something, a normal geometric shape. The fact that it's oval is in itself a Baroque thing. In fact, it's irregular, and that it's designed in such a way as to be a theatrical space, and that theatricality and drama are part of Baroque as well. Let's look at the history of how this thing came about. This is a plan of, you see the oval here, the piazza shape, and this trapezoid shape here. This is the outline of the current building, and this looks like a T-shirt. Is the shape of the original St. Peter's, and this was made in the 300s. Right here at the crossing is the center of both churches, and that is the burial place for St. Peter himself. And St. Peter was martyred. He was crucified on upside down in this area right here. He was killed here and buried here. And this oval shape, or this long rectangle with its round on one end, is called a circus. That is, it's a racing track, like a for running races with chariot horse-drawn chariots, called a circus. So this is the Circus of Nero. Was in this spot long before in the Roman times, and in that spot, there in this circle it says the location of the obelisk. There was an obelisk here that came from Egypt. Obelisk was created in 1800 BC, an Egyptian obelisk that one of the Roman emperors, Caligula, in 37 AD, brought it to Rome and put it here in the middle of his circus. And this obelisk was standing at the time that St. Peter was crucified. So it witnessed the crucifixion of Peter and also other martyrs, and some of them are buried here, right at the what became a few centuries later the center of the old St. Peter's Church. And of course, St. Peter is the one who was given the charge of upon this rock I will build my church. And so the whole Catholic Church's foundation is at this point. And this church stood for, from 350 or so to 1500. So it lasted quite a long time. But it was becoming dilapidated, and they decided to tear it down and build a new one in around 1500. And originally, we look at this. Originally, the first design by Bramante, who was the first one in charge of the design made this because in the High Renaissance, their ideal of a church was a centrally planned church, because that was a perfect, perfect square with a cross, equal-sided cross inside. That was what they thought of as being the perfect sort of thing, perfect shape. Um, and then when Michelangelo took over, Bramante died, and Michelangelo took over, and he changed it some. He make it more robust, made it so that he could put a really big dome on top of it, like Brunelleschi's dome, but bigger. So it needed to have more foundations here. And this was begun, and it was being worked on. If you remember Raphael's um, School of Athens, it has a picture of sort of what it looked like when it was being constructed. This was all was starting to be built at the while this was the plan, and then later, after they had built much of this, they decided to change the plan a little bit and extend it out, because as wonderful as a centrally planned church is in many respects as far as intellectual idealism is concerned, in terms of the liturgy of the church, they need a kind of a longitudinal axis, and they like the idea of it being a cross like this, so that um, um, by the time they got to the Baroque era and Moderna, who we're talking about, is the one who took it and added these three extra bays here so as to make it a longitudinal axis, and he added the vestibule here, or the narthex, and the facade, and what was going to be two towers here. As it turned out that they didn't do those. So this is the history of the church, and you can see here now at the point when the church was being made, there was still buildings right here. If you look, the old church had a square in front of it, and then there was a building complex around it, around this area here, and that was still in existence at the time that this was being built. And in the 1500s, this obelisk was moved from here to here. It took 900 men to move it. It was an enormous task to get this thing put right there. So when Bernini got the task of making the square, he had to tear down all of this stuff to create the square and to create a design so as to make this all work. And the purpose of this obelisk is that it existed at the time that St. Peter was crucified, so it bears witness to that event. As you see, there's a big fountain here. I think that was already in place, and Brunelleschi, and Bernini built another fountain symmetrical to it on either side, so as to make it two different focuses here. The obelisk acts as a gnomon for a sundial, and there's marks on the pavement to indicate the different places where the shadow casts at the solstices and equinoxes. So it's designed so as to be big enough to hold, hundreds and thousands of people, and the Pope appears right here to bless people. So it had to be big enough so that lots of people could be blessed by the Pope here, whether he's here or in the front window here. The experience of being in this space is rather strange because it's so big, and much of it is designed in such a way as to mess with your perception. One thing is that notice that this rectangle here, the trapezoid here, is not square. It's closer on this end than on this end, and it's kind of hard to tell what scale is like. But this distance from here to here is over 300 feet. It's a football field plus the end zones, this length here. So if you're standing here and looking at the church, like this is the square, and if you come up here, you don't see that those two sides are splayed. They look like they'd be parallel. You assume that they're parallel, and when you stand here and look, that splaying uh, of the actual plan of this thing causes it to make the building appear larger than it really is. That's one effect. Here's another looking at it from this angle. From this point here to the front of the church is a whole football field in length, but it doesn't look it because the square itself is foreshortened, and the walls that you look at to sort of get a sense of where you are and how far things away are distorted. And that distortion is causing you to see it differently than it actually is. And also the experience of walking from here to here is such that when you walk, the building doesn't seem to be getting any closer as you get to it. It seems to take forever to walk there because you can't tell how far you're walking, and because the things that you use as cues to tell you your progress are distorting your perception. So the whole thing is done in a theatrical manner. If you imagine the way theatrical sets are made, like so that when the audience is looking on us at the stage and there's a set back there, they often use things to distort in a set so as to make it look like there's more, it's deeper, or some other aspect of the set is different from what it actually is. And that aspect of what's going on here is theatrical. And Bernini was a master at that. Part of his architectural skill was involved in how to arrange your experience the way he would arrange the experience of an audience. He was a playwright, and he designed plays, and he actually acted and performed and designed the sets for plays. So he understood how perception worked. So that's one aspect of his colonnade here. It's also, everything is of a gigantic scale. It's to show you the power of the church, to communicate that power and strength and permanence by having hundreds and hundreds of these columns, travertine columns. So you can see the scale of them; they're gigantic things. And just this big edifice is it's all it does is create a border uh, for this piazza, and it doesn't actually need to have. You could have buildings coming up to here, and that would be the border. But instead, this big, apparently wasteful-looking expenditure of stone and effort to create this thing gives you this experience as if the arms of the church are out embracing you and sort of drawing you into the church. Here it is from looking at it from the dome out. You can see it has a big long avenue going out there, so you can see it from a distance, looking towards the church. Going this way, you have a big view of it. That looks like this. And you can see that again. It has this. It just looks huge. Everything about it seems so out of your scale and overpowering. Okay, let's look at the facade by Maderno. This was done much earlier. He was the chief of works in the first part of the 1600s. He designed those last three bays to extend it out, and he did this facade. Here's the drawing. This is the drawing. It's almost identical to the way it's actually built. This part here, just from here out, this part here is this part, even the wording here. It's designed in such a way so as to have a kind of a progression towards you. That is, these columns in the front are almost full columns, just attached, engaged columns, and then these on the flanking and these two on the outside are engaged columns. They're only half size, and then as you go further out, you have pilasters that are flat. So this getting progressively further toward you is means that the front projects forward, and as we'll see in effect of this is that much of the Baroque architecture in Rome and elsewhere in France that we're going to see has this effect of the middle part projecting forward, often flanked by a little bit less projecting, but still projecting uh, wings on either side. This drawing, by the way, has had two sections on either side of it. These are the original towers that were designed, and this part was built up to this level up here, and this part they did build the left one. That is, they built after Bernini was in charge of this. After Maderno died and Bernini got the job of finishing the towers. He built this one up here, and as it got high enough here to be completed to start the other one, cracks developed because Maderno had insufficiently founded or created the foundations for this part, and it wasn't sufficient, so they weren't able to make the tower, so they decided to destroy this part and down to this level. There's the part, that's what it would have looked like. But it would have had the effect of framing. If you look at this here, they would have been framing on either side of the dome. But you would only see it from this distance. When you saw it from the piazza, as you walk towards it, the dome disappears. You don't see the dome anymore because the facade is too high. When you walk in this front part and look to the right, you see this is a statue of Constantine. Constantine was the emperor who, before he became he was one of the tetrarchs, and he fought the other tetrarchs to gain control of the empire, and he received a vision, and that vision was to in this sign you will conquer, and it was the Cairo symbol, and because of that experience, he allowed Christianity to be no longer illegal in the Roman Empire, and that was the beginning of the establishment of the Catholic Church as a legitimate entity. So that's why he's here. But look at this image. It's in the darkness with light pouring in and picking it out. The highlights of it. That's Baroque all over. Especially the movement of the thing. The fact that it's everything about it is swirling and moving and wind blown, and this theatrical gesture here and looking up into the light. All of this stuff is Baroque, and we'll see this when we get to painting more so. But Bernini, he did so much of stuff on the inside that's, everything is he's responsible for much of what we think of as the Baroque. This is the interior, the crossing on the interior. The dome is right up above, and Bernini created this object. It's called the baldacchino. It's kind of a cover, I guess you could say it, an architectural thing, but it covers the spot right here under the floor is the crypt where St. Peter is buried. His tomb is down under there, as well as many other popes down there. So this is a very holy place. So the baldacchino creates a kind of a cover for it, and it's designed. Notice these columns are spiral columns, and those are characteristics of the columns from Solomon's temple, as described in the Bible. The temple that was created once the Israelites had finished wandering in the wilderness, and they had their original the tabernacle, the portable one. They made a permanent one, and it's described in the Bible, and so this was to indicate that this is from the original temple, and the other aspects of it, it's made to look as if it were a temporary thing, a thing with you have posts and you have some sort of fabricy thing with things hanging over the side. It also has some stuff up here, but it's all made of bronze and gold, and it's a very lavishly decorated object, and it's of a scale. It's difficult to see. Like this is this is what it looks like in place. Here's a. It looks kind of small in the space that it's in. There's the dome up there, and the actually this would be the choir area, the one going to the west, and this is the transept arm. So we're looking with our backs to the east entrance. But this is it looks really like a piece of furniture in a house. It's kind of like a footstool. It's so small, yet it's 100 feet tall. It's as tall almost as a 10-story building. And so understanding that makes you feel just how big this space is. It is so big that it's difficult to even conceive of how big the space is. Like when you're in it, um, you're not able to look at things at the distance and see just how big they are, because you see, oh, there's a person here. There's a person here. These are the uh, gospel writers. If you look at them, like here's one. I don't know which one this is. I guess this was in Mark. He has a lion next to him, but he is holding a little feather pen, and that feather pen is 6 feet long. So this is the size of a person, and so because that's the size of a person, then this person, is gigantic in scale, but it's difficult to see that because everything is of that scale. So you feel overpowered and overwhelmed with the scale of everything. Here are the words to S. Petrus. Et super hunc Petram idevicabo goes around the edge here. This is, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. This is Michelangelo's dome up there. And also Michelangelo designed, along with Bramante, this barrel vaulted space. But Bernini's job was to decorate it. Like Bernini was in charge of all of the facing it with marble and the sculptures that are in I think this is Longinus here. The sculptures that are in the corners. I think he did Longinus and others did the others, but he designed all of the things, all this decoration, all the words up here, all the facing of the interiors, all the Baroque looking stuff. If you look at any given thing, like little sculptures here and the spandrels, all these sculptures are Bernini's things, or his workshop did all these things. So in the Baldacchino, as you see, it's much more lavishly decorated. It being smaller, it's being made of bronze. I imagine this was a rather expensive thing to produce. And it's the only thing like it in the world. There's no other place where there's such a thing. It's just a one of a kind object, and it's designed so as to make the thing under it more special. Huge figures up here in bronze, and then gilt bronze, the gold part. Putti all around, holding up lamps. The little bees on it have to do with they are part of the symbol for the Pope. The particular, it was a Borromini Pope, so his family crest had bees in it. So whenever you see those, it's something made by that Pope. You know how hard it is to craft spirals. Spirals are different from other shapes, and they're much more difficult to make, and so that's why it's covered with spirals. And then, in addition to spirals, it has leaves growing, vegetal elements that are. Here's another image that are covering it. So and then there's little babies. I imagine this baby's 10 feet tall. I don't know. It's just there's no way of knowing what scale is. Acanthus leaves, and then whatever leaves these are, vines going up the side. all of it, I'm sure, has some special symbolism to it. Just look, Bernini is also responsible for this part right here. This is the apse end, and there's four big figures here in bronze, and there's a huge window with the light from the west. The setting sun comes through this, and it has the big rays of bronze light, which we also saw in the Cornaro Chapel with Saint Teresa, and it's filled with clouds and putti floating around everywhere. I think there's some special. This isn't glass. It's probably something special, like a cut stone that's translucent, like alabaster or something. Here's a close up of it. So he was responsible for all of these figures as well, and this is the chair of Saint Peter. This is the throne. There's the keys and the mitre, the helm, the hat. You see, this is just Baroque all over the place. Just an extravagant decoration, splendor everywhere you look. So that's Bernini and his thing, and he's hugely influential. He's basically designed the whole Baroque era in terms of what we think of as the over-the-top, excessively decorated, lots of movement and motion, and theatricality. All right, let's move on to Borromini. Borromini, I believe, was a student of Moderno. And he got to design his own church, though because this is a smaller church, he was able to be more experimental and do things beyond what you could do with a regular church. This is called the Church of the Four Fountains. It's called that because in Rome, they have all these streets. In public, there's a lot of public fountains. You can see one here on the corner, but this crossing has four of them. There's one on each corner. Special fountains that the city put in. It's a very hot place. Rome is sort of like, I don't know, Arizona in terms of climate, and so you get thirsty when you walk around. So there's lots of water drinking fountains everywhere, and fountains were a very popular thing for public works. Anyway, this building here, you can see how it changes. This is the building, and this is the facade. And so it's unlike many churches, because being in a city street and having to fit within a regular businesses within a city street makes it a little odd in terms of its church qualities. But it has a facade, and that facade is rather odd looking. This movement here, this undulating, swaying motion, is so extreme. But we can see the influence of Bernini's and his look of decorations, the sort of thing you couldn't have put on the front of St. Peter's because it's much more institutional. It's supposed to express power, but this is being a small church. The Borromini could be a little bit unconventional. So what you think of as normally four columns with an entablature on top, and normally an entablature is a straight line. In fact, up until this point, as far as I can think of, all entablatures were straight lines. But to have one undulate like this and the center part projecting out, we have seen that at least, with the facade of St. Peter's. It does project out in that it comes forward, but the entablature itself is straight. With Borromini, he's made the entablature much more dynamic, much more dramatic, and he's made the whole church go in and out. So you have solids and voids, and lots of opportunities for light and shadow. And look at this. These sculptures up here of angels holding up this big, looks like a big oval picture frame, are they're so removed from the surface. They almost look like they're just stuck on. They're almost completely carved in the round and just stuck on without being in relief at all. So that it looks like they're there, and that there's action going on. They're actually holding the thing up, and that all this motion that you see, all these irregular things are just so extreme. And I guess because this is a small church by that's I think the Jesuits made this. I think he could get away with something as extravagant as this, and uh, as far from the norm as this. Rather neat. I mean, it's a wonderful theatrical kind of thing here in the middle of a city street. You see what the rest of the buildings look like. When you get to here, this is just a big sculptural thing with lots of movement. Let's look inside. It's also very unlike a normal church inside. It's very small, but it has lots of sculpture in it, architectural sculpture, like columns that are going up these 2 stories with an entablature that or architrave that just goes around the room in this awkward sort of thing. I mean, in this what appears to be a very organic kind of shape, and this dome with all these weird shaped coffers. It's a very eccentric kind of place. This is what it looks like looking up into the dome space. This is just unlike anything else, and it seems so weird. But this is the way an architect in the Baroque period would express himself in making a church, where he has full reign to do anything he wants, to make something, over the top, strange, and give vent to his desire for all as great a theatrical, movemented experience as you can get. But there's something interesting about the design of it, that it isn't just as anything else is designed. As this is an original drawing of the thing. This is the swoop of the facade, and it's done with a compass and a straight edge, and using the principles of geometry. Like, this curve is the result of putting a compass point here, and putting the other foot here, and drawing an arc here. And then if you put the compass point here, you make an arc here. And the same with this one. They're portions of circles, and they move with each other. So it's not as though it were just a random sort of organic, like a arc that you just made using clay and just is making a natural object. This is a geometric object. In fact, all of this thing is a geometrical shape. Here, I can show you how it's designed. Start with a line. You draw a circle where the center of the circle is on the line. If you make another circle such that they overlap, then the point of intersection here and here, a line drawn straight between them, is exactly at a right angle to the first line. This is just a principle of geometry. It comes from Euclid. If you draw a straight line from this point to this point and continue it out, you get this. And if you do the one on the other side, and you put the compass point here and measure this distance and make an arc this way, and do the same thing on the other side, you have an oval. So this is how you make an oval. And this was how you made the oval for but in Rome, the Colosseum in Rome was done is this same oval, and using this same system, you can make all the seating. Like, you get to put the compass point here and do concentric arcs here and here. Put the compass point here and make concentric arcs. Put all the seating in the Colosseum would all be designed this way. So it's all a geometrical designed system. Here's a drawing of the original building with that geometry in it. You can notice that that one of the, in addition to this oval shape that governs the position of all these columns, it also governs these continuation of these lines. This is the center of these chapels that radiate around. There's apparently 8 of them going around in their different shapes, but their centers are on these axes that are created as in the same way that the oval is created. But the result kind of doesn't look so much like geometry as an organic thing, as a living, a living kind of object. Let's look back at this sort of thing. It looks like bones and the interior of an animal. Let's look back at that dome. These little recessed parts are called coffers, and the Pantheon has coffers in its dome too, but they're regularly spaced and they're the same shape, repeated endlessly. But here you have octagonal ones, and then you have these little cross-shaped ones, and you have hexagonal ones, and they get progressively smaller as you get towards the middle. This is the sort of thing that's kind of in Arabic architecture. Islamic architecture has the similar sorts of geometric shapes that progressively get smaller, so that what is being done is that using geometric patterns as an expressive thing is something that wasn't done, until this Baroque era. Here's a plan of the whole thing. There's a neat cloister over here, but you can see how it works. That it's much more regular and geometric than you would expect, given the irregularities, the organic irregularities that seem to be part of it. There's an elevation of it. Okay, let's look on another church, a little more normal looking. This is Pietro Cortona's church of Saint Luke and Martin, and it's in the Forum. That is the Roman Forum near. I think the Colosseum would just be over to the right a little bit, and the Arch of Constantine. Here's another one of the arches. I think this might be Titus or something. But these are the original Roman ruins of the Forum. These were here when the church was built. Here's the church, and it has a dome, and there's the transept back there, and this is the facade. Let's look at just the facade by itself. As we've seen in the Baroque, the front part of the church, the center axis, projects forward, and in here the artist has created a different way of doing that, a little bit more modest than Borromini, and a little bit more dynamic than, say, Moderno. It's just another way of doing it with this curved front and with the 2 projecting wings on either side. As we're going to see, is a pattern that occurs in much of the Baroque architecture. Central part projecting, the flanks are projecting, and otherwise the architectural element language is made up of standard Roman vocabulary of columns, entablatures, capitals. In this case, they're Ionic. And then pilasters up here, Corinthian. Having Ionic down here and Corinthian like up here this comes from the Colosseum does this. It has Ionic below and Corinthian above. That's just a Roman language, architectural language thing. And then some Baroque stuff. What I think of is just the kind of extra excessive decoration in little places like this, where you just put a bunch of stuff. You just put whatever you can think of, extra little putti, a little, what do you call this, a broken pediment that is semicircular arch with a cartouche up here, and looks like this is probably a pope's mitre up here. All these little elements are just things to add to the decoration of the thing, add to the sumptuousness of it. On the inside, it has the same architectural forms as St. Peter's did. It has a crossing, and there's a dome up there. All of the language is the same, only this is a much more modest version. This is something cleaner, simpler, without as much frou-frou, I guess, because Bernini's not involved. That's the columns are the same color as the wall. When it does have decoration, like up here, it's white on white. So it's much more tasteful, I guess you could say. But even within this does look very much like Baroque putti and angels and swirling masses and things, all this movement. But it's all contained within this spandrel, or I guess this is a pendentive up here. The form of this church originally comes from the Roman baths rather than the Roman basilicas. You can see that when they want to, they have some areas that are spare and austere looking, others that are excessively decorated. This is an example of Cortona's decorative interior of a dome with these eccentric things, the ribs and the spaces between filled with little rosette-looking things. I guess quatrefoils, perhaps you could call them, with little rosettes on the side. So this is, different flavors, I guess you could say, of Baroque architecture, and they all have a theatricality to them. They all have an excessiveness in terms of decoration. If you were to, after looking at some Baroque things, you go back and look at a real Renaissance church, like a simple thing. Everything is spare and clear and clean and geometric, with as little ornamentation as possible. So there's a very stark contrast between this and the era that came before.